In the last video, we looked at consumer surplus and price discrimination as a method of converting consumer surplus into firm profits. And we talked through some of the necessary requirements. We talked through theoretically what's going on. And then we introduced first degree price discrimination, where everyone gets their own unique price. And we said, look, it's pretty tough to achieve in the real world. The information requirements to charge each customer their own unique price is a really tough thing to know in practice. We talked about two-part pricing as maybe a way of getting closer to that. But in this video, we're going to focus on different types of price discrimination. As you might guess, when we called one type of price discrimination first degree, there's other degrees of price discrimination. Now, the thing to keep in the back of your mind as we go through these in this video is that first degree price discrimination serves the ideal. It converts all consumer surplus into firm profits. Second and third degree price discrimination are better than just a single set price. You're going to capture some of that consumer surplus, but they're less efficient at converting consumer surplus into firm profits. So they're not quite the ideal, but in terms of information available to the firms, in terms of the practicality, the usability, if you will, they're much more applicable to a variety of settings. They're just less efficient at converting that consumer surplus into firm profits. Okay, so let's start with second degree price discrimination. If a firm cannot distinguish between buyers because they vary based on something unobservable, so maybe you want to tailor one price to your high-end customers and one price to your low-end customers, or one price to a certain group, whatever they vary upon. If in first degree price discrimination, you would need to be able to look at someone and say, okay, you're a customer X, you're a customer Y. If you can't do that, second degree price discrimination is looking at, okay, is there a way to kind of come close? It's not going to mimic it, but come close. Okay, so second degree price discrimination is a category that incorporates a whole bunch of different pricing and product design policies. But the main idea here is that firms charge different prices depending on the characteristics of the purchase. So they're going to set up a system, and on the next slide I'll give you some examples of how this could look and how you encounter this pretty much daily in your lives. But they're going to set up a system where the customers who they know vary, so they know that these customers vary, they just can't identify them. Those customers are going to reveal their true types, and they're going to self-select the quantity price package that was designed for them. So we'll walk through an example and we'll talk about how this is done. But the idea here is because I can't identify the customers, they're going to have to self-select who they are and reveal who they are to me through their purchase choice. Okay, so here's probably the three most common examples of second degree price discrimination. So one is a quantity discount. You pay less per unit when you buy one size over another. So if you go to a grocery store, almost every aisle you go down, whether you're buying mustard or potato chips or whatever, there's often different sizes. There's the family size, there's the small size, there's a medium size. And if you look closely at the price tags there, they'll actually break it down for you in terms of how much you're paying per ounce or per gram or whatever the increments happen to be. And it's often the larger product is going to cost more, but in terms of per unit, per ounce, gram, whatever, it actually costs less. And so that is second degree price discrimination. You're going to get them to select the size that is ideal for them. This can also be based on quality instead of quantity. So things like if you think of, so my example here, Banana Republic versus Gap versus Old Navy, they're all owned by the same company, but one is considered their high-end line, one kind of their mid-line, and one their lower-end line. Toyota and Lexus. Lexus is considered the high-end line of Toyota. So you're putting out quality differences there, and you're going to have them self-select who they are. You can also bundle products together, and we'll spend time in the next module talking about tying and bundling and those sorts of things, so we won't go into too much detail here. But if you go through a fast food drive-through, they have combos, and those combos are cheaper than buying things individually. The components of the combo individually. Cable TV, so you think Xfinity, the local, cable company, they provide internet and phone and TV, and now they're getting into security and all these other things. And if you bundle things together, you get one price, whereas individually they cost a different price. So all of these are examples of second-degree price discrimination, where I can't identify customers on site, but I can put out either quality differences or quantity differences or bundle things together, and I can rely on them to self-select. So let's walk through an example of how this might look. Okay, so let's think about the airline industry. And I know we use that a lot, but it's an interesting industry, and it's really easy to get their prices. I mean, you go online, you Google a flight, and you can get prices for all the different competitors. And it's hard in other industries to necessarily get that kind of information. So we use airlines a lot just because information and detailed information is so easily available. Okay, so a airline is offering a flight, let's say between Spokane and Denver, or pick any two cities, doesn't matter. But they can't distinguish customers. So a customer is just online, an entity, that sort of thing. They can't figure out who's a business traveler and who's a tourist traveler. Okay, so they can't tell by sight who is who. But what they know is they know that business travelers value a first-class seat at $1,000 and a coach seat at $400. Tourists value a first-class seat at $500 and a coach seat at $300. So each type values a first-class seat more because it offers better amenities, those sorts of things, than a coach seat. But business travelers value both seats more than tourist travelers because when they're traveling, they have to be there for a meeting. Oftentimes their company's paying for it, and so they have a higher valuation on either type of seat. So if we could tell who is who, we would charge a business traveler $1,000 for a first-class seat, a tourist traveler $300 for a coach seat, and our revenue would be $1,300. Okay, so that would essentially be first-degree price discrimination, where we can tell exactly who is who, but we can't. Okay, so we don't know which type is which. We know there's business travelers out there. We know there's tourist travelers out there, but we can't identify them on site. So the optimal would be $1,000 for business travelers, $300 for vacation travelers, for tourist travelers, and $1,300 in revenue. So let's see how close we can get through a second-degree price discrimination policy since we can't identify the type. Okay, so first question, just to kind of orient you here, is could we charge $1,000 for a first-class seat and $300 for a coach seat and have travelers self-select? Because if you remember, with second-degree price discrimination, we said travelers will self-reveal who they are. Okay, well, if we charge $1,000 for a first-class seat, we can we can tell that tourists will not buy a first-class ticket. Okay, and we know that because on the previous slide, we said that tourists value a first-class seat at $500. So they won't buy a first-class ticket. They will buy a coach seat. So will buy a coach seat. Okay, so far so good. Okay, now the question is, what are my business travelers going to do? Okay, well, my business travelers, they value a first-class seat at $1,000. So let's say benefit of first class to business traveler is the value they get on the seat minus the cost that we're charging them. So we're extracting all of their consumer surplus, which is what first degree price discrimination would do. Here's the problem. The benefit under this pricing system of coach to business traveler is their value of the coach seat minus the cost that we're charging for coach seats. So they get a higher benefit from buying a coach seat than they would from buying a first class seat. So business travelers also buy coach. Okay? That's a problem for us. That's why first degree price discrimination won't work here. We can't just set these prices and assume they're going to self-select. That's not actually going to happen. Okay, so what is the airline to do? How are they going to price discriminate here to try and differentiate between the two? Okay, well, let's start by setting price coach equal to $300. Okay, now why are we saying price coach equal to $300? Well, if we set it over $300, we're not going to capture any of the tourists. So that doesn't make any sense. We want to try and capture both groups. We don't want to exclude one group entirely. So if we set it at $300, we serve both groups. If we set it under $300, we'd be serving both groups, but we'd be giving up money because the tourists are willing to pay $300. So if we charge under, we're just giving them consumer surplus. So let's take all their consumer surplus by charging $300. Okay, then we have to think about, so now what we want, and the problem we ran into above, is we want the business travelers to select a first class seat. So business travelers will buy first class if, okay, so what do we need? We need the benefit that they get from first class, which is $1,000 minus price, call it first class. We need that to be greater than $400, which is their value of a coach seat, minus price coach. Okay, well, we just said we're going to charge $300 for a coach seat, so we need $1,000 minus price first class to be greater than $400 minus $300. Okay, and if we do a little math here, we get that price first class has to be less than $900. Okay. So $900 is the absolute upper bound that we could charge for a first class seat. At $900, we will get business travelers buying first class. We will get tourists not buying first class. If we charge $300 for coach, we will get tourists buying coach, and we will get, if we were at exactly $900, we will get business travelers being indifferent. Okay, now, so go to maybe $899, and suddenly business travelers we can rely on, they're going to self-select and they're going to buy that first class ticket. How much profit or how much revenue do we make in that case? We make the $899 plus the $300. So we don't make $1,300. We make less. We make $101 less. But we're capturing some of that consumer surplus. We're doing better than we would by charging just a single price. Okay, so the general idea for second degree price discrimination is we're going to charge low demand customers their valuation. We're going to capture all of their consumer surplus. We're then going to charge high demand customers just enough to make them indifferent, or maybe $1 less than that between the two options. So we're going to charge a little bit less than what would make them indifferent. We're going to capture all the consumer surplus from the low value types. We're going to capture a lot of the consumer surplus from the high value types, but we're leaving some on the table. It's not going to be completely efficient. It's not as good as first degree, where we're charging everyone their own unique price. And you saw that by the difference between the $1,300 they would make by charging everyone their own price if they can identify who is who, versus getting $300 plus $899 from charging the low types their value, and then the high types, and by low and high we're talking value types, just slightly less than what would make them indifferent. Okay, third degree price discrimination is similar, but it's even a little cruder in a way, and it's a little less efficient at converting consumer surplus into profit. So you can sort of think of first degree as the most efficient, second degree is less efficient, and third degree is even less efficient, but it's better. They're all better than a single price. So for third degree, consumers differ by some observable characteristic, but you don't have enough information to peg each customer's unique value. Okay, so we know this category of customers is higher value versus lower value, but we can't look at person A versus person B and say that person has this value and that person has that value. So think of, a 35-year-old female walks in. Okay, it's a 35-year-old female, but I don't know her income, I don't know her preferences, I don't know all these other things that would help me peg her own unique value of the good. All I know is she's a 35-year-old female. So under third degree price discrimination, we're going to charge different uniform prices to different groups. So examples you're used to: kids eat free. We're going to charge different prices for kids versus adults. Subscriptions to newspapers, magazines, those sorts of things charge different prices to different groups. Airlines charge different prices to different groups. Movies, there's a matinee versus an evening. There's a student versus an adult. There's a senior versus a military. There's all kinds of different prices to large groups of people. Okay, so what do we need for third degree price discrimination? The seller needs an easily observable characteristic that signals willingness to pay. So you have to show a student ID to get the student price. You have to look under 10 to get the kid's price, whatever it happens to be. And then the seller has to be able to prevent arbitrage. They have to be able to prevent the low price group from buying it and reselling it to the higher price group. And they can do that by printing things on tickets, or just preventing, like if you order a kid's meal, it has to be the kid eating it. You can't just hand it over to the adult. But if you can do this, and it's not nearly as high of a bar as first degree price discrimination is, our pricing rule becomes very simple. Consumers with low elasticity of demand should be charged a high price. So if it's very inelastic, they get charged a high price. If it's elastic, they get charged a low price. That's our same rule we've used before. Okay, so let's look at an example here. So let's say that the demand for coffee in the U.S., so maybe this is like Starbucks, is negative 1.5, and in Japan it's negative 2. So the U.S. is more inelastic, Japan is more elastic. Now we're relative to one another. These are both elastic measures, but the U.S. being lower is more inelastic than Japan. Okay, let's suppose that making coffee costs $1. Okay, using the equation from a previous module where we said, okay, we're going to equate marginal revenue, marginal cost, and we said this. So when we were talking about elasticity, we said that's marginal revenue. So if we just plug in what our elasticity is and we multiply by our marginal cost, we get the prices for the two different geographies. We're going to charge for our coffee $3 in the U.S. because they're more inelastic, and we're going to charge $2 in Japan because they're more elastic. So the more inelastic group gets the higher price, the more elastic group gets the lower price. Okay, so overall, in terms of price discrimination, kind of wrapping up all three types, it allows firms to convert some consumer surplus into profit. It allows them to offer more quantity, to potentially offer more options, which, if you assume options and availability are good things, because they can capture more consumer surplus, they're able to produce more and offer more varieties. And evidence suggests that if they're more that in industries where the firms are more able to price discriminate, the markets are more competitive. There is more competitive forces. There's less sort of antitrust issues. It can be used as a predatory tool to harm competitors, and I'll come back to that on the next final slide. And it may injure, so if you think of Walmart, you could injure competitors there. Okay, so here's sort of public policy. There's something called the Robinson-Patman Act, which is intended to protect small independent business from discriminatory pricing. So it's unlawful for any person engaged in commerce to discriminate in price between different purchasers of commodities of like grade and quality, where the effect may be to substantially lessen competition, to injure, destroy, or prevent competition. Now, those of you that are lawyers or in law school, you can sort of probably see through far better than I can the legal ramifications here and how difficult it is to probably prove this. But the intent here is not so much price discrimination from the producer to a final consumer. It's more aimed at from a producer to a retailer. So we don't want Walmart, we don't want some of these companies to be able to leverage their size maybe to get a lower price than their competitors do, so their competitors can't really compete. So that's really what this is about, is more about producers to retailers as opposed to retailers to consumers, and trying to ensure that there's a level playing field in the retail market, that one firm isn't getting the good at a significantly cheaper price than their competitors.